I am the good shepherd. For many of us, this image of Jesus carrying a small, soft little lamb on his shoulders is one of the most comforting and one of the most familiar images we have of Jesus. It was certainly one of the most popular images for Jesus in the early days of the movement that developed into Christianity, painted on catacomb walls and sculpted out of graveside rocks. This image rivals even the popularity of another lectionary text for today, the beloved Psalm 23, which paints a similarly comforting pastoral scene. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Preaching on beloved texts like these can be intimidating, I will admit. It's sort of like a band or a coffee shop musician who decides to cover a timeless hit song. On the one hand, you have to make sure to keep those core elements that people love so much, something of the vibe, the timing of certain phrases, or the people simply will not stand for it. But on the other hand, there's something truly magical about a cover that manages to stay true to the heart of the song, but expands it in some way, turns it so that it's that same beloved song, but it strikes you in a new way. I do confess that this image that comes to my mind, the image that comes to mind for me is the character Patrick from a show called Schitt's Creek, when he takes Tina Turner's Absolute Jam, Simply the Best, and offers it as a touching acoustic serenade love song that for sure made me cry. And if you haven't seen the show, just Google Noah Reid, Simply the Best. You will not be disappointed. Today, we're going to take a new look at this beloved image of the Good Shepherd, and we'll see if it might strike us in a new way. What does this image of the Good Shepherd tell us about Jesus, and what might it tell us about us? Now, John, the gospel writer, knows what he's doing. He's showing something important about who Jesus is. Jesus is the shepherd from the psalm, the God who protects and provides. It's an important claim in this gospel. Jesus is God. And its significance is even more vivid when we consider the context of the first century of the Roman Empire, where the vast majority of people experienced extreme poverty and had very little agency to change the fact that day after day they expended all of their energy just in order to survive. This was true for most citizens of the Roman Empire, but notice that in the context of this story, Jesus is talking primarily to Jewish inhabitants of the empire who suffered even more, since they were not Roman citizens and they were excluded from the promised benefits of the imperial system. John's description of Jesus as the Good Shepherd mirrors descriptions of rulers in the Roman political system who promised to shepherd the people, fostering lives of security and abundance for their subjects. With close to 80% of people living with extreme food insecurity at this time, the false promises of the imperial system were quite alluring. Promising a Roman peace that would benefit all, this system actually brought insecurity to almost everyone, except those at the very top. That may sound a bit familiar, and note that we will return to in a minute. My gut reaction is to look at a system like this and to say that system wasn't working. But the truth is that that system was working very well and exactly how it was designed to work. And the experience was nothing like the Roman Empire's promises of abundant life. Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, offers a different way that will bring true abundance. So what is that different way? The Gospel of John, as you probably know, begins with a beautiful poem. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The poem goes on to recount that the Word not only created the world, the Word also became flesh and dwelled among us. God took on human flesh to set up camp on earth. In this opening of John's Gospel and Jesus' claim to be the Good Shepherd, we can hear echoes of the prophet Ezekiel addressing the people of Israel who are suffering at the hands of false shepherds. Thus says the Lord, I myself will search for my sheep. I will rescue them and gather them. I will feed them. I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep. This claim, I am the good shepherd, in John's Gospel is Jesus saying that the day of God's action has arrived. Jesus is God in action. Jesus is on the scene to care for God's people, to show a different way. Jesus is God tending to the sheep. So what does all this tell us about us? On the one hand, we may be the sheep who need a good shepherd. And there's no doubt about it, this year has left all of us in need of comfort. But we are also called to tend the flock. Even though we are sheep, we are also charged to take up the mantle of the Good Shepherd. It occurs to me that this claim might sound a bit familiar to you. Last week, you all looked at John 21, where Jesus tells Peter 3 times, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Echoing the prologue to this gospel, which claims, no one has ever seen God, but Jesus has made God known. The first letter of John says, no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, God's love is perfected in us. If we love one another, God's love is made complete. It's made manifest among us. So Jesus, the Word, is not the only way that God takes on flesh in the world. When we love one another, we too manifest God's presence in the world. As Jesus prepared for his death, he was comforted by this fact. He prayed, I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world. And as he prepared to leave the world, he told his disciples in John chapter 20, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. So what if we were to join Jesus in being the Good Shepherd? I am the Good Shepherd. You are the Good Shepherd. Now, John's metaphor is pretty mixed. Jesus is not only the shepherd, Jesus is also a sheep. Well, more accurately, John presents Jesus as the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. Giving a unique timeline, John weaves his gospel story so that Jesus hangs on the cross at the same time that the Paschal lambs are being slaughtered at the temple. Now, the Passover was a remembrance of God's liberating work for Israel, dismantling a system of oppression that had held them down. This is not simply an atonement for individual sins. It's something much bigger. Jesus as the Lamb reminds us that sin is systemic, and Jesus on the cross reminds us that these sinful systems have a cost. Jesus bore the cost of challenging the Roman imperial system. And unlike the hired hand whose work for the sheep is only for his own good, whose protection and provision are only conditional and only last so long as they don't cost him too much, Jesus, the Good Shepherd, the truly noble shepherd, knows that it will cost him. He was killed as an insurrectionist, as an enemy of the state, a radical whose message against those in power was too much of a threat. He received a capital sentence from a system of power who could not have him disrupting the status quo. In fact, it is his fellow subjugates of the Roman Empire, the religious leaders within Judaism who had negotiated their own space within the power structure, who accuse him. religious leaders who had found a place of some status and were unwilling to give that up. Jesus, rather than finding whatever privilege he could find in this ancient society, sought out those who were even more marginalized than he was. He did not work within the system. He directly exposed and challenged that system. Caesar is not the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. This system has brought you a hired hand with false promises, and even if you are safe in this system, there are others who are not. And his body bore the cost. It almost goes without saying that this sounds very familiar. Our systems in America today are not broken. They're doing exactly what they are designed to do. And even if I am safe in this system, even if you are safe in this system, there are many who are not. The cost is so evident that it becomes difficult to even select examples of this cost. Whose bodies bear the cost today? Dante Wright, Adam Toledo, Noel Quintana, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Too many to name. Yes, Jesus is the good shepherd who brings comfort, but this message is not comfortable for everyone. Continuing to draw from the shepherd imagery in Ezekiel, we can see that God, as the good shepherd, promises to bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. But God also promises to destroy the strong and to feed them with justice. This is not a comforting image for everyone. And before we jump to point the finger at some other oppressor, notice that the judgment in Ezekiel is for those within the flock. As for you, my flock, God says, is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture, but must you also tread down with your feet the rest of the pasture? When you drink of the clear water, must you foul the rest of the water with your feet? This is a word of warning when we find ourselves benefiting from systems. Even if you are safe in the system, not everyone is safe. Even if I am safe in the system, not everyone is safe. Maybe this morning you are feeling the weight of this because you are not safe in the system of our world today. White supremacy, heteronormativity, patriarchy, ableism, all of these flowing from a capitalist system that pits us over and against one another, rather than, as Jesus says in our text for today, as one flock with one shepherd. In that sense, all of us in the flock can find comfort today in the good shepherd who can pick us up and remind us that we do not belong to the systems of this world. And maybe this morning that comfort can also be served with a dose of disquiet for those of us who sometimes find ourselves benefiting from a system that does harm to others. In that sense, we move from that place of comfort and we rise to the challenge to join Jesus in doing his good shepherd work, gathering scattered sheep into one fold, seeing that harm done to any is harm done to me. As one of my former students once challenged me, become a traitor to the systems that you benefit from. When we do this, there is also a sober word. Being a good shepherd also means being the lamb who bears the brunt of violence. We have to ask ourselves, are we willing to suffer? Perhaps Jesus would remind us this morning, you are the good shepherds, and the good shepherds lay down their lives for the sheep. So, a heavy message from a passage that we often come to for comfort. What is the good news here? The good news here is that we sacrifice and suffer under sinful systems, but as we do have a good shepherd. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. To survive, we must think bigger than the systems train us to think. We must engage our imaginations and inject them with faith and hope so that we don't become consumers of the status quo. There is a holy tension between acknowledging the sinful systems and grieving the harm that it does to us or that it does to others, and yet daring to faithfully envision a different world. Envisioning the comfort of still waters while walking through a dark valley, a celebratory feast that goes on while those who mean us harm are looking on. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. I am the good shepherd. You are the good shepherd. And yeah, it'll cost us something.